Okay, everybody. I think we will go ahead and get started because looks like our people coming in are slowing down. So I want to go ahead and thank everyone for being here today. We're so excited to see everyone here to talk about culture. Tonight's event is part of a longer series in the Community Education Series hosted by the Muskingum County Social Justice Coalition, the Muskingum County Library System, as well as the support of the Zanesville Convention and Visitors Bureau, the Chamber of Commerce, and the Community Foundation. This series is on the third Thursday of every month through December of this year, and participants who attend at least 7 sessions will receive a certificate of completion. During this session today, we will put the link to next event's resources so you can register for it today. Just a little bit of housekeeping. Please mute yourselves and remain on mute until the Q&A. During the Q&A, please raise your hand and Daryl will call on you to ask questions. During the presentation, we also ask for you to turn off your video to avoid distractions. And last but not least, this session is being recorded. Our first session is already on the library's YouTube page and our Facebook as well. So I will go ahead and introduce our team leader of the Muskingum County Social Justice Coalition, Daryl Graves.
Thank you, Stephanie. Again, welcome everyone to the Community Education Series. We are so glad that you're able to join us tonight. And I just want to say, one of the things that we talked about, if you were with us in our kickoff session last month, one of the things that we shared with you is that we were going to bring this series to you, and that we were going to bring a series of topics and presenters. And so our first topic for tonight is, what is culture? We're going to take a little bit of a dive into that topic and hopefully answer some questions and maybe clear up some mysteries or misconceptions about what culture is or isn't. We also promised you during that opening session that we were going to have our sessions brought to you in a way that was thoughtful, engaging, and meaningful for you and for us, and that we would have them offered to you by folks who had a local stake in our community and the success of our community. So with that in mind, we thought that there was no one more appropriate to kick off our session than tonight's presenter, Dr. Elita Jackson. So a brief introduction for Dr. Jackson. She's an emeritus professor at Kent State University and a licensed professional clinical counselor and supervisor. Her research interests and publications include HIV/AIDS prevention, stress, multicultural counseling, women's issues, and African-American history and development. She's a member and past president of numerous community and counseling organizations, including the Ohio Counseling Association, the Ohio Association for Counselors and Supervisors, the Ohio Association for Multicultural Counseling and Development, the Judge Perry B. Jackson Scholarship Fund, and the local Nelson T. Gant Foundation. Dr. Jackson participates in many forms of visual and performing arts and loves to travel. As recently as 2019, she climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. She is married to Jerry D. Jackson, a basketball Hall of Famer at Ohio University, and they are proud to have 2 daughters and 4 grandchildren. Dr. Jackson's philosophy of life is, what God makes of you is his gift to you. What you make of yourself is your gift to God. Dr. Jackson.
All right. Thank you very much, Daryl. And thanks everyone for being on this session this evening. And I certainly hope it will be beneficial. I had to switch places here because my battery was running down low on my laptop. I didn't realize it was that low. But we're going to be talking about culture this evening. And I want to start off actually with a game and an activity that I've used a lot of times in some of my classes. It's called Shout Out. And as soon as I bring this screen up to share. So what I would like to do to begin is for each of you to think about what culture is, and take maybe just one word or a phrase and write in the chat what culture is. And I'll give you just a few minutes to something in the chat.
Anita, would you like me to read some of these?
Yeah, I'm wondering why I can't see them, but yeah, go ahead.
We have food, lifestyle, patterns of normative behavior shared by a group, community, norms, encompassing, the way we live, traditions, way of life, influential, norms, values, beliefs, traditions, social identity, comfort zone, norms that persist across generations, and history.
Okay, okay, great. We'll stop right there. And okay, I have one other question to ask, and that is, describe one thing about your culture. And that could be either one word or a short phrase. Okay, you want to read a couple of those, Stephanie?
Sure, we have, let's see, let's go back up. We have mixed, individualism, poutine, good food and music, isolated, good work ethic, nature, family, Jamaican reggae music, Irish, fantastic food, identity, my faith, pierogies, and community involvement.
Okay, all right, thank you, thank you. Okay, think about how was that activity for you in coming up with those responses? Someone wants to respond, they can raise their hand.
Anita, we have hard because the concept seems too big to define. And we have another person that said an automatic response.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Thank you. I'll continue on the best that I can. Maybe I'll figure this out eventually. Culture, you know, is a big concept. Someone said it's very large and hard to respond to that. Typically, most of us live our culture, but we seldom consciously think about it or explain it or analyze our own culture. But in a nation like ours, where there is so much cultural diversity, it is so imperative that we have an understanding of various dynamics of culture. Despite the attention that we do give to culture, however, and we still find ourselves kind of grappling with the multicultural nature of our society and our world. So I want to mention a few of the difficulties. We have one is vague concepts or meanings that do not intrude into our consciousness because we live our culture. A lot of times, like I said, we don't think about it, we don't evaluate it. But as a result of them not intruding into our consciousness, these behaviors and attitudes that are manifested at a level of awareness, they may unknowingly promote underlying and implicit assumptions that really have an effect, sometimes a profound effect upon others. Let me give you two examples. If you invite me over for dinner at 6 o'clock and I show up at 6:30, I don't know that you are furious with me for showing up late. And now the dinner rolls are hard because you tried your best to keep them warm. If I invite you over to my house for dinner at 6 o'clock and you knock on my door right at 6 o'clock, you don't know that I view that as disrespectful behavior because you arrived on time, which indicates, wow, you must really be hungry and you want to be fed right away. Now, that's not truly me, but that's an example of some things that I've heard and I know about in terms of different cultural groups. Here's another one. If you come to my family gathering and everyone is talking at the same time over top of one another, I don't know that makes you confused and uncomfortable. When I go to your house, maybe everyone is so quiet and polite and they're taking turns to talk. You may not know that I'm uncomfortable and trying to figure out, well, when is it my turn to talk? And you're wondering why I'm not saying anything, and you might think I'm mad at you. So we begin to make these assumptions when we don't know really what's going on, or we're not familiar with uh, the functioning of another group of people. So typically we make these assumptions, um, and even in our own country, culture, we live this, but this is what we know. And when we meet people from different cultures, we don't understand their behaviors. Another part of the difficulty uh, in resolving some of these issues is that of definitions. Most of our definitions of culture are fragmented. Culture has often been defined as a way of life. Well, everyone has a way of life, so that doesn't really tell us very much. Prior to the 1950s, and I'll be real short on this, prior to the 1950s, culture was defined in terms of patterns of behavior and custom. So the focus was on sensory observation, habits, behavior, observable aspects of culture. So things like dress, food, music, language, rituals, artifacts. During the 1960s, however, began to have a focus on ethnographic variables like nationality, ethnicity, shared history. But that view ignores the complexity of individuals and our cross-cultural interaction. So then later, probably the latter 60s, early 70s, another approach was to look at in terms of social systems that we belong to. Those include demographic variables like age, sex, residence, stable or status, status variables like social, educational, political, economic, affiliation variables, formal or informal, ethnographic variables, ethnicity, nationality, and shared history. However, all of these that I've mentioned, these approaches are fragmented and focus on what is identifiable, what can be seen. What gets lost in these definitions are the values that give meaning to these aspects of culture. It's our values that provide the basis for a fully intelligible comprehension of culture, because the actual organization of cultures is primarily in terms of their values. A view of culture without reference to its values is fragmented and becomes meaningless, a meaningless assemblage of items. So what I want to do now is to provide a conceptual framework that can assist us in a greater understanding of what we have in common, as well as our variations. So you're going to hear me talk about the surface level of culture, as well as the deep structure level of culture. And I know when I first learned about this years ago, it just kind of opened up a whole new world of understanding. It provided for me an integrated, a holistic conceptual framework to understand our cultural differences. And so that's it in our commonalities. So that's what I want to share with you this evening. Provided a understanding of why we think, behave, and make decisions and define events in the way that we do, and why we respond to our environment in a particular way. And it really places us at a greater advantage of understanding behavior and attitudinal differences. Some of you may be already familiar with these concepts that I'm going to share. I certainly invite your input. For some, this may be entirely new, but hopefully the examples will be interesting and fun, and maybe even funny. Let's see. So this will be a holistic conceptual framework that I'll be presenting to you. If we think of an ocean, the surface level of culture are the things that we can readily identify, like clothing, food, music, art, language. Typically, when we celebrate cultures in schools or at festivals, we're celebrating only and taking a look at only the surface level aspects of culture, which are referred to as the techniques of culture. So we go to this next slide. You'll see technique at the top of the pyramid. I'm going to use a pyramid for our example here. So the further up we are on the pyramid, those are the things that we can pretty much see, define, and talk about. And in looking at the chat, some of the items are at that level. But where I want to spend most of the time is at the base of the triangle, because the base holds everything else in place. And these are the philosophical assumptions that underlie a culture. These are our psychological orientation in life that determines how we think, behave, make decisions, how we define events. And this is kind of the lens through which our experiences are filtered and partly determine our reactions to our environment. So we're going to take a look at these philosophical assumptions that underlie the culture. And here I have a phrase, misunderstandings in verbal and nonverbal communication often occur because individuals and groups are operating on different worldview systems. So I'm going to talk about several dimensions pertaining to the bottom of the triangle. And actually, I'm going to start with one. I'm going to skip down a couple of slides and start with time orientation. I want to start with that one because that one is pretty easily understood. Not that the others aren't, but a lot of people tease about and talk about time orientation. If you look at the chart there, you have the left and the right. Oh, this is a little different. Okay. Time orientation can be measured in units, and time orientation is very exact. And that is where we use units of measurement, and time is to be very exact, whereas, and there's a focus on the future. Whereas in other cultures, time is experienced experientially, it's flexible, and there's a focus on past and present. People who measure time in units, say an event starts at 11, they think of the time at as very exact and expect things to start right at 11 o'clock. People who measure time experientially often use phrases like, well, midday, I'll see you around midday, or near sundown or sunrise. And sometimes this can be very frustrating when groups of people are operating on different time orientations. Now, that doesn't mean we can't adapt and adjust to that. I know my time orientation is very flexible, but if my class starts at 7 o'clock, then I have to be there at 7 o'clock. It might cause me a little more stress because I have to step out of my realm and adjust to that. But time in some cultures is goal oriented and always looking to the future. You must plan for a better livelihood. When time is focused, we're in cultures where time is focused on the here and now, because you don't know if there will be a future. The future is not given. So the focus is primarily on the here and now. We're going to back up to the first one that I had on here, and that is the perception of the universe. Some people have a perception of the universe that is material, and some people have a perception of the universe that is spiritual and material. So when we see the universe as primarily spiritual, or primarily material, it must be measured in some way. It must have physical essence. Scientific proof is important. Nothing exists apart from the material or the physical world. If it's material, it can also be used. So the world, the universe is available for us to use. You can accumulate what you need. You feel safe and secure in what you know to be real. Research has proven that COVID-19 vaccines are effective. You have another example, you have betrayed me in the past. That is evidence, and so therefore I can't trust you anymore. So it's looking at what is experience, what is material, what's physical, what has actually happened. If one's perception is spiritual and material, then there's an acknowledgement of the physical and the emotional and spiritual aspects of the universe that is felt and it's knowable, but can't be seen or explained. There's this thought of there's a cause for our existence. There's an entity outside of the material that is the cause of the material existence. So you refrain from destroying the forests, for example, because you feel the sorrow among the trees when a forest is chopped down. Some of you may have experienced this, where you feel like you've been in this place before, you've been there, but you know physically you know you've never been there. It feels like everything in your surroundings is like, oh, I think I've been here before. Sometimes you feel like you have an experience where you've gone back into the past. Sometimes you know that something is going to happen or has happened, and then you find out later, oh, it really did happen. Well, how did you know that before? It actually occurred. Slaughter of maybe millions of buffalo is not a loss of just a food resource and clothing, but felt deeply as a tragedy, the life of the buffalo, and a break the harmony of existence. Going back to the COVID one, research has proven that COVID-19 vaccines are effective, but you also pray for its effectiveness inside of you. So what happens when people who lean more to the material and some lean more to the spiritual and material, when they begin to have interactions, sometimes those that are viewed as material and spiritual are said to be, oh, they're kind of weird or crazy or not believed. And this sometimes can result in them shutting down and not sharing those experiences. Some cultures are more open to sharing those kind of experiences than others. Those who are more material are sometimes viewed as uncaring and destructive. So you have these different assumptions we make about one another because of these different underlying assumptions and belief systems that we have. Let's take a look at perception of the environment. Some cultures are more in harmony with nature, some are master and control in nature. If one's perception of the environment is to master and control, it is to serve our human needs. We need to be able to do that. Those who acknowledge living in harmony with nature utilize the resources sparingly and respectfully in their surroundings. So here again, there are assumptions made about one another. One group is viewed as destructive and greedy, and the other group is sometimes viewed as primitive and not technically technology advanced. Another dimension is the perception of self in interpersonal relationships. If your perception of self is individualistic, that reflects free thinking. That's what we want. Autonomy. You value being self-responsible, self-determined. Your identity is about who you are as an individual and not tied to any particular group. And you're not responsible for the group. If you're living up to that ideal, then you're going to be responsible for yourself and no one has to take care of you. If your life is not going well, then you tend to view it as an internal issue. It's your fault. You didn't work hard enough. And that's kind of the idea of rugged individualism, being responsible for yourself. At the same time, you say to yourself, don't blame me for something I didn't do or something I'm not responsible for. So when the individualistic person approaches the topic of racism, they see racism as an individual problem, as an individual person mistreating another person. Well, if I didn't mistreat you, then it's not my responsibility and I didn't do it, don't blame me. Solutions are individual, not structural. So what more can you ask of me? Now, the collectivist perspective, your identity is part of the group. If the group does something, you are responsible. You look for external causes and look to see how to help and bring change. You feel some responsibility. You see the interconnectedness of systems. You look structurally. You might change your heart, but that does nothing to change the system. So the interpersonal relations are extremely important. How you interact with one another. I can remember being in Egypt, where it's not like going in a store here in the United States where you just run in and purchase your item and you're out of there, but you go in and you're met by people that work there or the owner of the store, and they want to know who you are, where you're from, and you sit down and you have a discussion, and this discussion in terms of getting to know one another might be 15, 20 minutes long or more. And then different items are brought out, and you then can begin to select the item that you want. So the relationship becomes extremely important. Another example of that is students that I had in a group where uh, another colleague of mine who was white, the two of us were co-facilitating a group, and the colleague told the students in the group, while we're in the group, let's just refer to each other by our first name. And the African American students in the group did not do that. So she repeated it. And I told her, I said, well, they're not going to call me by my first name, because that was part of the culture. You use titles. And so it was important for them to make reference to me as doctor rather than, and so those are just some things that show the difference in relationships. The problem occurs, for example, when individuals see the collective perspective as taking my rights away, my freedom, and they feel that they are being blamed. It becomes like an attack on everything that they hold dear. Collectivists will say they're unloving and uncaring and monstrous. You don't care about people and you're greedy and stingy. So those are some of the problems that may occur as a result of being from these two worldviews. Let me mention just a couple more. Man, our time is just flying by. Knowledge, the highest value is that on the, yeah, it's at the bottom there. In some cultures, the highest value is external, learning about all the things around you. You must understand what's out there in order to survive. Some cultures view the highest value is learning and understanding yourself. You must understand yourself to survive and meet the challenges in life. What good does it do to know all the external facts around in the world if you don't know yourself? Or the others might say, what good does it do to know self and not know the world that you live in? Let me see. Logic. Oh, I love this one because we see this so often all the time. Logic is dichotomous or diunital. Dichotomous thinking is where reasoning takes an either or perspective. Gender roles are rigid. Another example, if Black lives matter, there's an assumption that other lives don't matter. Diunital thinking is an acceptance of the opposite. Gender roles are flexible. Black lives matter does not disregard the importance of other lives that matter. So you don't get caught up into a dichotomy. It's a unital in an acceptance of the differences and opposites. Communication. Some cultures are more oral and expressive. In other cultures, you have to write it down. It's written, and their way of communicating is reserved. So as you look at these different ones, actually I have them on a chart with, left and right. But as you look at the differences, you can begin to see themes through these dimensions. We begin to see how these dimensions connect and begin to have a better understanding of why the various cultures function, why they think, why they make decisions as they do. Let me give you another real quick example. there were watching a basketball game, for example. There was Asian, 3 or 4 Asian guys on the basketball team, and some European American uh, fellows on the team. And the European American guys were rushing down the floor real quick and trying to make a basket. Whenever they would get the ball, they would just charge down the floor real quick and try to make a basket. When the Asian guys on the same team got a hold of the ball, they were passing the ball off to one another. And pretty soon they started getting frustrated with one another, because the Asian American guys were wondering, why are they rushing down the floor so fast and not giving everyone an opportunity to play? And the European American guys were thinking, why are they stalling and passing the ball around to one another? Well, that was related to this notion of the relationship was extremely important among the Asian Americans in that game. And for the European American guys in the game, the competitiveness, the action, doing something quickly and getting it done. Now, time is running out. So the modality, if we look at process, the modality on one hand is being and cooperativeness. On the other, it's doing something and competitiveness. The example I gave has something to do with that, competitiveness, and one was trying to focus on the cooperativeness. So what begins to happen is that if we are going about the day, our processes, our activities, without any understanding of these underlying assumptions in our cultures, then we can misunderstand what is occurring. And I think for me, when I began to see that, it really helped in understanding why, a little more about why people function as they do in different cultures. It provided significance of these values, so I'm able to consider these in cross-cultural interactions. If you're not aware of them, you can't consider them. You can begin to consider these in conversations with people that are different than yourselves. When I see others' behaviors, I can often recognize that the behaviors may be due to one of these perceptions. It's a conceptual framework to understand the differences across cultures, and it provides more of a holistic perspective that we don't often find in some of these other definitions of culture. Something else that we can look at is also recognizing the functions of culture. And you can read down through the list. What does culture do for us? It brings us a sense of belonging and basis of interaction and orientation in life. Maybe some of you have felt this when you lost your parents. You felt like you lost your orientation in the world. Where do you fit in? Because now my parents are gone. So these are some of the functions of culture that are extremely important. Then we look at the forces that generate cultural differences. Why are we different? And if you look down through here, you can see biology, institutional networks, many of the interpersonal communication patterns, technology. That has a lot to do with where we live. So we see these other aspects that are very important. I think the thing that is so important is that these are aspects of culture that we don't readily identify. As I mentioned at the beginning, so often we focus our attention on the surface levels, the identifiable aspects of culture. There are paradoxes of culture. Culture is universal and it's very specific. It's stable and it changes over time. It's conscious. There's parts we know and we can talk about, but a lot of it is unconscious. It has stereotypes and it has individual differences. So oftentimes we'll hear ourselves say, well, you know, Irish are like that, or truck drivers are like that, you know. Those are some of those stereotypes that we find in different cultures, but also to recognize that we are unique, we have individual differences. So this last little diagram here, I wasn't able to draw the full circle, the lines through all the circles, but we are humanly universal. So in some ways, we are all alike. We are culturally specific, and that would be those parts of the circle that overlap. The humanly universal parts would be the parts that are in each of the circles. And then the culturally specific would be those that kind of overlap maybe one of the other circles. And then the part that does not, the part of the circle that does not lap at all, like these outer portions, oops, I moved it. These outer portions are the individual or the unique aspects of who we are. So those are the dimensions. I'll entertain questions. I hope this has been informative. My screen is still crazy here, so I sure hope your screen is better than mine. I don't know what happened here,
Dr.
but
Jackson, thank you very much. That was very enlightening and thought-provoking, I think, for us. And so, as we mentioned earlier, if you have a question for Dr. Jackson, please use the reaction button to raise your hand, and I'll call on you if you have any questions for our guest presenter tonight.
I see Rebecca has her hand raised.
Yeah, hi. I wondered if there is any way to include this information in school. That, you know, one of the things I have noticed when my kids were younger, they participated in things like Odyssey of the Mind, and which taught critical thinking and, you know, planning and that kind of stuff. This, I think, is really critical when you think about how many more multicultural experiences kids today have because of the internet and the possibility of seeing other cultures and stuff. And if we taught them how people look at things differently and how these different aspects of culture impinge on our awareness. I mean, we hosted a lot of exchange students because we noticed that kids here had no outside influences, but not everybody has that opportunity. It seems to me that if we taught kids how to see these differences as not a bad thing, just a thing, that there would be less dissension and more opportunity for people to share and to understand better.
Some of these concepts actually can be taught K through 12. they would take a little longer time to do that. You know, I feel a little bit rushed trying to pull all of these different concepts together. If you took each one, you can give examples of this K through 12 levels.
Yeah.
You can, I think it's very important because again, like when we address cultures in school, usually it's at that surface level. We
Yeah.
have our music, we have our foods that we bring out, we have all these different things. We don't, very seldom do I hear people talking about the deep structure of culture. What is it that motivates us to do what we do and to function in the way we do? And all these things we can start teaching them at very young ages. And to teach in a way that you're not seeing, whether you lean more to one perspective or the other, there's no what I want, superiority or inferiority in those. It's just that it's different.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to understand those differences. When immediately we had some things that happened this summer relative to the uh, shootings of, that were going on. And all of a sudden I could really see very clearly that a lot of people got into their dichotomous thinking. Well, if I'm unaware of that, that would never register on my mind. But if I'm taught that and know about that, I could see the dichotomous thinking that's going on and maybe help people to look at it maybe from a diurnal perspective in that setting, in that situation.
Dr. Jackson, we have another question in the chat.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That I will kind of paraphrase for you, but the question is about different groups that are said to possess culture. And the question is, are there national cultures such as folks from different continents, European, Asian, African, and our class cultures, such as the culture of poverty, or race cultures, such as Black culture or white culture? So how do we think about that?
Well, you certainly want to be inclusive of all those things, because all of those entities begin to have some impact on us in terms of the way we think and the way we interact with others. And so that it should be inclusive. But this framework can help us to understand that also. It's not just about race or ethnicity, but it can help us to understand those differences in terms of poverty, and all those other things that you mentioned, geographical location, Southerners and Northerners, and all those different aspects of who we are, because we are so varied. I mean, you can walk from the equator in Africa and go north to Sweden or Denmark, and you'll find every group of people imaginable, just in your journey.
Okay, so we are almost at our time, but I see we have at least one more question.
Okay.
It's like Mayor Mason has a question. Go ahead.
And thank you very much, Dr. Jackson. I'm wearing my Kent State pullover and Kent State ball cap just to give you a shout out.
All right.
But I do want to go back to the earlier comment about educating children. I feel really bad for teachers now, because it seems like all they are driven to teach for is whatever test is being held, in April. And so the teachers don't have the opportunity to integrate, again, sociology and cultural, I'll call it cultural studies and history, if it's not on the test. And so perhaps the first thing we need to do is give the teachers the leeway of actually teaching what they think the children need. But that really means we have to go back somehow and change these national tests because, and again, I deal in education, at the university level. I feel bad. A lot of kids are so focused from about their junior years in high school that they want to be an engineer or a doctor or something along those lines, that they really don't take any classes where they understand, again, history, political science. You could ask probably most college students approximately what decade or what century was Iraq created or Iran. And they would have, they might say 400 years ago and obviously be off by 300. So again, I'll just make my point is somehow the education system has to change from the testing level to give teachers the opportunity to teach what they think the kids need.
You're right on track, right on track. And I've been saying this for several years. It's like, I think we have to go back. What is school for? What is our education for? We need to ask that question. What is it for? I guess if we look at our education as just to K to 12, just get out and get a job. Is that all our education is for? I mean, not that we discount it. I mean, that's important. One of the difficulties with human existence is getting along with one another. That's been a long time issue. So when we decide that our educational system, that is going to be a really important issue to deal with, and have time in our school systems to do that. We can look what's happening in our nation. We can get along with each other. There's so much division. And a good part of it is that we really don't understand each other's cultures and our identities and so forth. So we almost have to go back and say, well, what's the purpose of school? What are we supposed to be doing in our educational system? And then make time for it. I don't know if that really answers your question, but maybe I'm thinking too big here.
Well,
yeah.
I think we've had a good discussion. You gave us a lot to think about. I don't see any other hands, and we are almost at our time. So if anyone wants to put anything else in the chat, we can capture that and still get a response afterward. We will send you the PowerPoint. Well, I'm sorry.
I see Rochelle has a question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I may not be able to answer all of it. I'm supposed to be on something else at 7.
Go ahead.
That's okay. Thank you. It's actually more of just a comment. And first, just saying thank you for all the knowledge that you offered to us today. But I love all of the comments focused on education. And I think that if we begin to look at diversity as an opportunity rather than a threat, I think we would be a lot further ahead in a lot of the systems that we need to change. Our educational systems, I learned years ago, and I'm not sure how true this still is, but the state of Texas themselves kind of governs more of what is taught throughout our nation. So what Texas approves as to be taught in our school systems actually is how we govern that. And that's scary to me when you understand the history of the state of Texas. So I think it's just so our systems are outdated and it hinders our educators, it hinders our students. And to your question about what education should be, I look at it as something that should be preparation and enrichment and a toolkit that we provide to our young people so they can learn how to navigate, not just academically, but relationally and socially in the world.
Yes, yes. Thank you for your comments, Rochelle. Rochelle Pryor.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. Let's stay in contact.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
So
very
we
much.
will we will answer, we'll capture the chat, and we'll still respond to some of the questions that are there. But we are at our time. Like I said, we'll share the PowerPoint, and we will share the recording as well. Will be posted on the library website. We'll let you know when it's posted and available for review. And we certainly hope that you join us for our next segment, which will be the third Thursday in March. In April. So we hope that you are back to join us then, and we look forward to continuing our conversations. So I appreciate all of you, and have a good night.